The baby boomers. Whiny, narcissistic, self-indulgent people with a simple philosophy. Give me it, it's mine! Give me that, it's mine!
The thing about the boomers is they've been alive for a very long time. Many of them have attained absolutely no wisdom.
Imagine being a boomer that has it so good you think somebody's going to retire by saving $100 a month. Oh my God.
Boomers be like, you have it so much easier in today's world, just work harder. Gen Z's rent prices versus average income.
Baby boomers need to recognize that the America that we inherited is not the one that they grew up in, and that graph shows you everything that you need to know.
Gen Z's purchasing power is now 86% lower than baby boomers at the same age.
The boomers never wanted their children to have better lives than they did. The boomers were threatened by their children. The boomers viewed their children as obstacles to their own success.
I have never seen the war that I am seeing between the boomer generation and the millennial generation. The amount of hatred between these two generations is unbelievable.
So what's the core thing they're fighting about?
Betrayal.
The baby boomers have sort of done the millennials and the Gen Zs dirty. They've run up the debt. They haven't saved a ton of money. You hear Bernie Sanders constantly complaining.
Are you better off today than somebody in your circumstance would have been 40 years ago? What do you think?
What if I told you there's a new pandemic sweeping this world and this one's got a TikTok? I'm talking, of course, about the OK Boomer dancing Bernie girl from Twitter.
Yeah, it used to be if I work more hours, I can buy a house. Now it's if I can work more jobs, I can afford rent.
No one fixed the housing supply when they saw that it was a disaster in 2012. They allowed private equity to come in and start buying up houses. That could have been stopped. They could have done something about the Social Security disaster way earlier. They didn't. They saw that the birth rates were starting to go down. We saw that the college debt was continuing to increase and people weren't getting jobs at the value that they should have.
Baby boomers bought up many of the big homes across the US when they were raising their families. Now they're staying put, even though their kids are all grown up.
Boomers did not really move out of the job markets in ways that allowed millennials to gain upward mobility in different types of corporate structures.
These boomers, they have more money than they know what to do with because they're stupid. And they're sitting at country clubs and they are actually very excited about the prospect of civilization crumbling.
The power didn't really change hands in the way that people grew up and expected it to.
Ladies and gentlemen, boomers, I think you have to admit it, life was a little bit easier back then. You only paid like 20 bucks for your house. There were only like 4 different job classes.
They should be able to have a roof over their head, air conditioning, a cell phone in their pocket, and food in their belly. We're not asking for mansions and yachts here. The median household income in 1980 was $21,000, and at a 13% interest rate, your monthly payment was just $550, which was incredibly doable with that income. Today, $415,000 with a 7% interest rate is putting our payment at $3,000. Most people making 85 grand cannot afford that.
How did the richest generation in American history leave behind a nation drowning in debt?
The worst, dumbest, most narcissistic, the shallowest. Every sentence had like 9 cliches in it. They were all at Woodstock. They remembered when Kennedy was shot. It was the day the music died.
They view life as this pleasure thing that's designed for them.
These people were given everything. Everything was handed to them.
They were only about feeling good about themselves.
And they took it all. Took it all. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And they stayed loaded for 20 years and had a free ride.
The Woodstock generation, we see them as this progressive, free-loving they were just selfish drug addicts. They just wanted to have sex in the mud and do heroin, and that's okay. But the boomers proved that because the boomers were those people. The drug just became money and status and all of that stuff.
They were idiots, but above all, they were about themselves. I hated them then. I hate them now.
They are the oldest people ever to run for president, breaking by only 4 years the record that they set. They're at the age, there are no more age-related milestones to hit.
The only good thing they produced was like the music of 1972. Other than that, horrible people. Horrible.
They were the chosen generation, born into the post-war boom, raised on prosperity, and crowned as the future. They marched for change. They embraced free love. They built the suburbs, and they never, ever let go. Today they are the CEOs, the politicians, the landlords, the gatekeepers of wealth and power. And yet, one thing is sadly uniting people. Everybody blames the boomers. And this isn't just another one of those classic generational squabbles. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. It's resentment at an entire generation that seems to embody the contradictions of modern life. Preaching hard work while reaping the rewards of luck, demanding respect while refusing to pass the torch, claiming to have saved the world while leaving behind the bill. History has never seen it quite like this before. So far, this has been history. We will make a better world for our children. We will make a better world for our children. Fuck you, entitled brats. Kids, not happening. So why does the world look at boomers and see the villains of the story? Why did the generation that grew up singing about revolution become the symbol for universal disdain? Why are boomers viewed as such a giant diarrhea stain on the underwear of American history? Why does everybody blame the boomers? It's clear that baby boomers still hold the keys to the kingdom. They are the wealthiest generation in human history. They own more real estate than any generation before them or after them. They fill the highest seats of government, lead Fortune 500 companies, run universities, and sit on the boards that decide what gets built, what gets funded, and what gets shut down. In politics, culture, and economics, the shadow of the boomers is everywhere. Sometimes I ask people the question, if you could have been born in any year, what year would it be? Most of the time, nearly every answer people give is wanting to be born somewhere between the 1940s to 1950s. This, coincidentally, is when the boomers were born, between the years 1946 to 1964. Boomers rose during a time of unprecedented economic expansion. Wages climbed steadily, tuition was dirt cheap, housing costs were low, unions were beneficial, pensions existed, and the middle class was expanding. For the average boomer, adulthood began with opportunity as the baseline. They were born into this era where right after your high school graduation, you could walk into the career factory, give the manager a firm handshake with eye contact, and tell him you want a job. With that, you would be able to single-handedly support your stay-at-home wife and 2.5 kids. Hard work mattered, but it was amplified by a backdrop of prosperity that made upward mobility feel like gravity. Fast forward to today. This is not the workforce Millennials and Gen Z entered into. They inherit a landscape defined by stagnant wages, unaffordable housing, and the slow-motion collapse of job security. The idea of purchasing a home is now a punchline. The American dream that was once considered standard now reads like satire. And yet the generation who grew up in abundance is often the one telling the younger ones to just work harder, stop wasting money on coffee, or pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's advice that would be valid, if it weren't coming from the people who already climbed the ladder only to pull it up behind them. In the 2010s, these kind of complaints from younger people were not seen as credible, as they would come from the younger people who had a greater victim complex. These were people who went to college for non-lucrative majors with no career potential. These were people who wasted all their money on temporary experiences. These were people who blamed anyone besides themselves for what their lives were becoming. These were people who blamed the boomer. The 2020s saw a stark shift. Gen Z was becoming countercultural to this unsustainable mentality. A lot of Gen Z went to college to study STEM, they worked multiple jobs, and they had aspirations of building their futures and starting their families, just to face a brutal job market and to get priced out of homes. They followed the advice the boomers preached for years, and it led nowhere. Gen Z felt cheated by the boomers. Gen Z felt the boomers stole their futures from them. Be born in 1949. Don't have to fight in a war. Be 20 years old in time for the summer of '69. Pick up some ridiculous 11 out of 10 who's hitchhiking to Woodstock in my Plymouth Roadrunner I bought after working a summer job for a month. She's immediately into me because she's from a small town and I'm the only man in her life who's not her father or brother. Bring her home and marry her. Go to get a job, hired off the street with no experience, and get trained. Buy 10 acres of land for less than what I make in a year. Rent out my land for decades. Retire and sit around the house all day looking at my collection of boats and cars I never use. Kids today just don't understand hard work and pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. It's about the symbolism of watching an entire generation aggressively hold on to power. It's watching politicians who are decades past retirement age still shape the laws that will affect people not yet old enough to vote. It's watching wealth concentrate into the hands of those who benefited from a system when it worked, even as the system itself crumbles for everyone else. These are not personal attacks against individuals the younger generations know in real life. When younger generations look at boomers, they don't see their parents or grandparents. They see gatekeepers. They see landlords. They see the people cashing pension checks while telling them to get a third job. They see the keepers of a golden age that will never come again. And beneath all of it, they feel the sting of betrayal. The knowledge that one generation feasted at a table of prosperity and then slammed the door before anyone else could sit down. So what can we do? What should we be doing with all our money in the modern era? When I was a teenager, I took this financial literacy course led by Dave Ramsey, and it was very insightful. Well, very insightful for a teenager. Dave Ramsey is the archetype for boomer economic hypocrisy. He preaches the gospel of fiscal discipline like a televangelist of spreadsheets. Don't buy a house you can't afford. Don't have a credit card. Live below your means. On the surface, this is all responsible and virtuous. After all, it's advice that worked perfectly for boomers. For them, this was a practical playbook. Houses were affordable, wages were rising, pensions existed, and compound interest was on your side. Follow Dave's advice in 1985, and congratulations. You are living the dream. Try the same playbook today. You follow the rules. You scrape together a down payment while working 2 jobs. Max out a 401k. Eat ramen for dinner. And still can't buy a house because prices have doubled. Rents are insane. Student loan debt is crushing. And interest rates are spiking. You are pursuing a dream that does not exist. You've been hustled by a system designed to make your sacrifice irrelevant. Dave Ramsey is repackaging a boomer-era cheat code and selling it as universal morality. It's like telling someone to build a snowman in the Sahara and then blaming them when it melts. The financial landscape has changed, but the advice hasn't, and it's a reflection of this worldview that says, if you fail, it's your fault. If I succeed, it's proof of my wisdom. The moralistic financial sermons that boomers love are just a way to justify the wealth they inherited or built in a system that is no longer accessible. Follow their rules, they say, and you'll succeed, ignoring the fact that this game now has different rules. It seems boomers love morality disguised as practicality. Boomers love nostalgia masquerading as wisdom. Boomers love preaching the gospel of sacrifice while hoarding the rewards of a system they've rigged. Did something psychologically make them this way? The baby boomers were a generation born into a world completely transformed by technology. Their parents were strong people shaped by hard times. These were strong people who created great times. The greatest generation had endured depression and war, and when peace returned, they were eager to embrace the gadgets and conveniences of modern life. Technology in the average residential home revolutionized. For the first time in history, technology became a way of raising children. The television set became the new babysitter, a glowing surrogate parent that spoke in jingles, sitcom laughs, and news anchors' voices. It filled the silence that once might have been conversation. The automobile was a mobile cocoon where kids spent hours strapped into the back, isolated from the adults in front. Suburban appliances like washing machines, microwaves, and vacuum cleaners promised the parents efficiency and also freed them from the slow rituals of family life. Boomers were raised in households where much of the emotional labor of parenting was outsourced to machines. This was not intentionally malicious. This was just a subtle way that majorly shaped their wiring. Previous generations had learned empathy and patience through direct interdependence, such as living in multi-generational homes, caring for siblings, or working the land. The boomers were the first to grow up mediated by screens and devices. This idea is obvious today, but it was less obvious back then. Basically, when you're raised by technology, you learn to see the world through technology's logic. Convenience over connection. Consumption over community. These are the values baked into the device choices that raised the boomers. Critics argue they carried those values into adulthood. To later generations, this looks eerily psychopathic. It's a kind of emotional detachment, a prioritization of self-interest, a willingness to treat everything outside of themselves as disposable. Of course, not every boomer became a narcissist, but the culture of their upbringing set the stage for a society where empathy took a backseat to efficiency, where success was measured only in accumulation of wealth and toys.
Give me it, it's mine! Give me that, it's mine!
They grew up both empowered and scarred by their relationship to technology. When younger generations accuse boomers of being selfish, out of touch, or even psychopathic, it's a recognition that something in their early environment trained them to prize things over people. And boomers never grew out of TV. The TV was their reality, their black box, their cube. Television was the glowing authority figure in the corner of the living room. The TV told them who the bad guys were, what cars to buy, what cereal was good for you, and they nodded along as they ate their TV dinners. Nothing has changed. They've traded Walter Cronkite for rage-bait brain rot on Fox News and CNN. They've traded Saturday morning cartoons for minion memes on Facebook. They never had to extensively train the muscle of skepticism. They take everything literally because why wouldn't you? When the box in the corner of your childhood home gave you a story, you believed it. They were trained to consume images, not to interrogate them. They were taught early, don't question the images, don't question the narrative, and they never snapped out of it. They're addicted to being spoon-fed a worldview. The irony is that they are the first ones to call you gullible. They'll tell Millennials and Gen Z don't believe everything you see on TikTok, while they're buying gift cards to pay a quote-unquote Microsoft support technician. The boomer condition is absolute faith in screens. They'll mock you for living on your phone while they literally worshipped a glowing box their entire lives. I love baby boomers who say kids don't even know how to write cursive in a negative way. Like, okay grandma, you can't even turn on your laptop without getting 6 viruses and wiring half your retirement money to a Nigerian prince. In 1970, John Lennon released his first studio album after the breakup of the Beatles. A song near the end of the album had these lyrics: I don't believe in magic. I don't believe in I Ching. I don't believe in Bible. I don't believe in tarot. I don't believe in Jesus. I don't believe in Kennedy. I don't believe in Buddha. I don't believe in mantra. I don't believe in Gita. I don't believe in yoga. I don't believe in kings. I don't believe in Elvis. I don't believe in Zimmerman. I don't believe in the Beatles. I just believe in me. This is a cultural snapshot of boomer self-centeredness. It's not exactly a declaration against dogma. Lenin is not simply rejecting organized religion or popular figures. Instead, he was articulating a worldview in which personal belief and individualism always overrides collective values, traditions, and authority. These lyrics are a refusal to defer to anything outside the self. Everything is secondary to the individual ego. This is symbolic of a broader boomer mentality. Nurtured during a time of economic expansion, boomers grew up with the implicit message that personal fulfillment was paramount. The system was there to serve you, and that questioning authority was celebrated if it intended to center on self-expression. Lenin's song is like a checklist of shared cultural values discarded in favor of the overriding principle of me, me, me. One of the most infuriating things people find about the baby boomers is how they reinvented themselves. Boomers are often remembered as the generation of Woodstock. I mean, boomers were wild. They were naked in the mud and doing each other, tripping on tons of psychedelics, chanting against the Vietnam War, preaching free love and tune in, turn on, drop out. They were the rebels, the idealists, and the dreamers who claimed they would never sell out, man. But just a few decades later, many of those same unhinged rebels became the suburban homeowners scolding their kids about responsibility. The same boomers eating entire sheets of LSD became the politicians voting for harsher drug laws. The same boomers getting laid in public became the cultural gatekeepers, moralizing about abstinence and family values. Was this just gaining maturity with age, or was this something more? That shift from radical counterculture to strict authority is one of the loudest forms of hypocrisy we've ever seen. Younger generations look at boomers and see a group that indulged in every form of liberation, then slam the brakes once they'd had their fun. Again, they dropped acid but then supported the war on drugs. They pushed sexual freedom but then wagged their fingers at promiscuity. They sang protest songs against the establishment, only to become the establishment. People resent the way that boomer idealism got discarded when it was no longer convenient. They see boomers as sellouts. Now, full disclaimer, this is not a political analysis. I do not care who you voted for, and I'm not asking who you voted for. I'm not claiming to align with any of these controversial arguments I'm going to present. I'm simply pointing out how each side of the American political spectrum views the dynamic of this boomer generation. On the political left, resentment toward boomers stems from the neoliberal turn of the late 20th century. The generation that once marched for civil rights and railed against the corporate state became, in many ways, the architects of free market globalization. Bill Clinton and countless other boomer leaders advanced policies of deregulation and privatization, policies that critics argue widened economic inequality and eroded the social safety nets their own parents had relied on. Boomers had benefited from cheap tuition and strong unions, and now they presided over an era where those very advantages were cut off for future generations. To younger progressives, this looks like betrayal. Boomers are basically living in a completely different country from you. Free healthcare paid by you, fat retirement account juiced up by the private equity that is parasiting off your labor, fat net worth due to insane housing costs paid by you, free money every month from Social Security paid for by you. It's understandable these boomer criticisms were far more frequent among liberals exposing economic inequalities, but over the last few years, the boomer criticisms have been much louder among the conservatives. Complains about illegal immigrants ruining America, yet continues hiring them. Complains about everything being made in China, yet continues blindly consuming and blindly supporting free trade, and calls any attempt at imposing tariffs or protectionism communism. Expects his kids and grandkids to just magically have Christian values when his generation is the one that removed God from the schools. Expects his kids and grandkids to just magically have discipline even though he never disciplined them. Complains about homeless people yet owns 8 vacant homes. Complains about how America has lost its way yet is willing to take his own kids to court for not paying rent. Complains about young men having long hair and tattoos when his generation is the one that normalized it and gave them that freedom. Preaches the importance of diversity to young people while he conveniently lives in a 100% white retirement community. Owns 99% of America's assets, property, and wealth, and refuses to give anything up yet expects young people to just obtain wealth from out of thin air. Expects the government to bail his ass out whenever he goes bankrupt because no one wants to buy his overpriced 8 vacant homes. Needs dialysis, pills, insulin, Viagra, and blood transfusions every week just to survive. Then says young people are too dependent on technology. Says young people have no skills when he doesn't even know how to do basic tasks like open a PDF file, slide a credit card, or plug a printer into a wall. Thinks stock market numbers reflect life for most Americans. Says government programs don't work while collecting a social security check every month. Complains about young people not knowing how to cook when it's his generation that popularized microwaves, fast food restaurants, and instant meals. Calls young people and homeless people lazy for not having jobs that don't exist anymore because his lazy generation sent them all to China. The mind of a boomer. On the political right, the boomers are seen as the generation that failed to conserve anything. Critics associate them with the cultural revolutions of the 1960s and 70s, with the loosening of sexual norms, with Roe v. Wade, with the decline of organized religion, and with the rise of mass immigration. The globalization that liberal critics frame as neoliberal economics is, for conservative critics, a cultural unraveling. Jobs get outsourced, borders get blurred, and and traditions dilute. Younger conservatives accuse boomers of selling out heritage and identity in exchange for cheaper labor, cheaper goods, and gated retirement in homogenous suburbs far removed from the consequences. Every social revolution the boomers promoted was less about freedom or equality and more about feeding capitalism more affordable labor. For example, feminism. History remembers the women's movement as an expansion of rights, a push for equal opportunity, a breaking down of patriarchal barriers. But critics argue that by pushing women into the workforce, corporations could double their labor supply, drive down wages, and dissolve the single-income household. What looked like liberation was completely the opposite. There is this meme that states that staying home and raising your children is oppressive, but going into an office every day, being told what to do by men other than your husband, and joining forces with the oppressive patriarchy, that is empowerment. Immigration also fits this framework. Boomers oversaw and later supported policies that opened the door to mass immigration, which, in this narrative, was about securing a constant stream of underpaid, easily exploited labor. Meanwhile, those same boomers often insulated themselves from the effects by retreating to gated communities and overwhelmingly white suburbs. They preached inclusion from afar. Boomers sold social change as a moral victory, but the outcomes often aligned with economic utility. Once the structures of family, religion, and community were weakened, the market moved in to fill the void. Now, the irony is that both the left and the right are angry about different aspects of the same story. On the left, boomers are seen as hypocrites for abandoning their radical ideals once they achieved comfort. On the right, boomers are seen as hypocrites for claiming to defend tradition while pushing its erosion. In both cases, the accusation is the exact same. Boomers talked a big game, but left behind contradictions that later generations are forced to deal with. Boomers grew up in an era of abundance, experimented with freedom, then pivoted to telling everyone else what they could and could not do. It's a double standard that leaves younger generations with the impression that boomers got to have it both ways. They got to be the rebels and the rulers. They got to live in a world of wide open possibilities, then slam the door once they were safely inside. The boomers were the great experimenters. Every generation that followed experienced the side effects of that experiment. There was a psychological trickle-down effect. Generation X was born between 1965 to 1980. I have been trying to make sense of you Gen Xers for some time, and you guys are just absolutely confusing. But I'll try my best to stereotype you guys too. Gen X were the first victims of the boomers. Born in the shadow of divorce rates that skyrocketed during the 70s and 80s, Gen X was often described as the latchkey generation. They were children who came home from school to empty houses because both of their parents were working longer hours. Raised with less direct supervision, they learned independence, but also disillusionment. They saw the supposed boomer ideals of freedom and progress crash against the realities of corporate consolidation and globalization. It was interesting how this phased out. Gen X was a generation defined by apathy. While boomers shouted about saving the world, Gen X rolled their eyes and muttered, "Whatever, dude." Their rebellion was sarcastic and self-deprecating. You can see it in pop culture. In our era of economic uncertainty, there's been a circulating meme pointing out how every Gen X movie was like, I have a stable job with benefits, I'm going insane. Was Gen X really like this? The film Office Space is notorious in presenting this, showing the existential boredom of security without meaning. The sitcom Friends really spoke to Gen X. The show captured the reality of young adults trying to navigate work, love, and identity in a world that was supposed to be full of opportunities, but felt hollow. Gen X watched their parents divorce in record numbers, their jobs were increasingly corporate and bureaucratic, and their culture was saturated with advertising. The result was a deep suspicion of sincerity, and the character Chandler Bing embodied that suspicion perfectly. Chandler couldn't express emotion directly without undercutting it with a joke. His humor was a defense mechanism against vulnerability. He worked a high-paying job with his own office that nobody respected, not even himself. He would rather roast himself than risk being taken seriously for even a second. It was exactly how so many Gen Xers felt. A little lost and detached, but still determined to survive by laughing at the absurdity. The lights were still on. If boomers embodied the wide-eyed optimism of the American dream, the Gen X Chandler archetype embodied the shrug, the smirk, the really? This is it? Can I be any more apathetic? Chandler's mannerisms became the blueprint for Gen X humor. The sarcastic one-liner, the quick jab at one's own insecurities, and the refusal to commit to sincerity. Chandler showed that the safest way to live in a disappointing world was to keep your expectations low and your punchlines ready. The 1985 movie The Breakfast Club was a defining film for Gen X. This was a deeply emotional drama. It told the story of 5 high school students, each a vastly different stereotype, all sharing a Saturday detention together. Each of these kids were alienated, cynical, sarcastic, and deeply aware of the arbitrary hierarchies of school and society. Though they could not see eye to eye with each other, all of this changed the moment they smoked weed together. And that's the movie. That's it. That's the whole movie. If you really want to understand Gen X, I truly think that might be the depth of that generation. Eventually, Gen X grew up and became the parents to Gen Z. The cultural transitions became fascinating. Gen Z inherits both the boomer contradictions and the Gen X survival mechanisms. Where boomers experimented with freedom and Gen X responded with apathy, Gen Z has responded with irony. The schoolyard bullies in Gen Z had to adapt. When a bully cornered his classmate on the playground and said, "Give me your lunch money," the victim would respond by saying, "Bro really can't afford his government-subsidized lunch. LMAO, broke ass." Irony is the perfect cultural adaptation to living in a world where every institution feels hollow. Boomers promised prosperity, Gen X learned not to trust those promises, then Gen Z grew up online, where nothing is sacred and every claim is memed into oblivion. Their humor is layered, self-aware, and blatantly absurd. The irony is darker now because the stakes are higher. And to be fair, there is a ton to critique on my own generation, Gen Z. If it sounds like this whole analysis is too harsh on the boomers, understand there's way more material I could do on the Zoomers, since you people love exaggerated generational stereotypes so much. Alright, so let's review the generational impacts. Boomers disrupted traditional structures in ways that created instability for their children. Gen X coped with that instability by withdrawing emotionally, by cultivating apathy and sarcasm. Millennials exist. Gen Z, raised by the Gen X parents, absorbed that armor of sarcasm and translated it into their own digital native language. Where do we go from here? The boomer may hear all of these modern insights, gain new awareness of their generation's impact, carefully consider all of it, and respond with the rebuttal, "F you entitled brats." Now look, after unpacking decades of cultural, economic, and political contradictions, it is easy to paint the baby boomers as a generation of hypocrisy and unearned advantage. But if we look closer, maybe there's a more nuanced story. Boomers do remain fascinating, instructive, and even inspiring. It's weird. In every job I've had, the boomers I've worked with have either been the laziest and most entitled, or they've been the most ambitious. And to be honest, the ambitious boomers I've worked with have inspired and motivated me in my career unlike any other coworkers. And I personally don't see this negative stereotype in my own family or my hometown, since the boomers I knew in my rural upbringing seem to generally be morally consistent in their actions and perspectives throughout their lives, preventing them from exuding the same level of blatant hypocrisy. Boomers were born into a world of possibility, and they seized it. They were the first generation to grow up with television, cars, suburban homes, and mass consumer culture. They experimented with freedom, creativity, and rebellion in ways no previous generation could. They built industries, pioneered technologies, and reshaped culture on a scale that is hard for younger generations to fully grasp. In the world's post-war aftermath, boomers became the architects of much of the modern world, for better or for worse. They still teach us lessons. They demonstrate resilience in the face of rapid societal change, creativity in forging new cultural norms, and a history of willingness to challenge authority and question inherited systems. Their contradictions can be instructive. Seeing the gap between their ideals and their outcomes offers a warning about the fragility of moral consistency. They show us that it's possible to dream big, even if reality forces compromises along the way. Criticism of boomers may additionally carry a psychological undertone as well. Watching a generation that once symbolized youthful rebellion now dominate the machine as elders reminds us of our own mortality. They embody the fear of being left behind in a fast-moving world. Seeing these obviously mortal beings in charge is unsettling. Mocking or railing against them can be a way of distancing from that fear, of asserting we are still young and invincible. If we strip away all the okay boomer jokes, what remains is a chance to learn. Boomers can teach us the importance of persistence and taking risks. They show us what it means to hold power and influence, and what happens when power is hoarded. They remind us that history is lived by real people whose choices echo across generations. The most fascinating part of the movie Idiocracy is the fact that despite the citizens being incapable to advance, the technological and institutional structures still keep everything running. Machines move, food is produced, electricity flows. It strangely parallels the real world. The baby boomers built many of the systems, the infrastructures, and the institutions that keep modern society moving. Even as younger generations wrestle with economic and cultural instability, much of what functions reliably was constructed and maintained by boomers. They created a scaffolding that allows society to keep running, even as people within it struggle to sustain it. As we critique the boomer legacy, there's the opportunity to observe it and extract wisdom from it. Criticism can coexist with respect, and frustration can coexist with insight. Boomers are just another generation, complex and flawed, whose story still shapes every one of us. They taught us that life is messy. We will be inheriting the world that boomers built, and we have a responsibility to advance it. As Gen Z embraces these hard times, it has become overwhelmingly clear what our mission is. We will make a better world for our children.